Have you ever heard of the parents of Mary, mother of Jesus? Few people know the powerful trajectory of Joachim and Anna, two almost forgotten figures, but who were essential in the plan of salvation. This is one of those biblical stories that seems hidden between the pages, but when revealed, transforms our way of seeing faith, miracles, and spiritual obedience. Imagine living with the weight of silence, being judged for something you have no control over. Infertility at that time was seen as a curse. Still, this couple remained steadfast, cultivating an unshakable faith even when all seemed lost. This story begins in pain, but moves towards redemption. Get ready to discover the legacy of faith left by Joachim and Anna. A story of humility, prayer, sacrifice, and hope that teaches us about trust in God's plans, even when they seem hidden. In the midst of chaos, a promise is born. And from this promise, Mary was born, the one who would give birth to the Savior. Do you want to understand how an ordinary couple became a pillar of humanity's greatest redemption plan? Stay with me until the end, because this story is so profound that you may never look at the Bible the same way again. Joachim and Anna lived at a time when hope seemed suffocated under the weight of Roman rule. Biblical history says little about them, but the silence of Scripture hides a deep pain, infertility. In a culture that valued offspring so much, not having children was almost like carrying a public sentence of shame. But it wasn't just a matter of biology, it was spiritual, emotional, social. And in this scenario of oppression, they faced the judgment of men and the silence of God. This is where the real battle of faith begins. The hardest thing was not just the absence of a child, but the feeling that prayers were never going beyond the ceiling. Have you ever imagined praying for years, fasting, serving, and still nothing changes? Joachim and Anna knew what this was, and even in the face of pain, they remained obedient to the divine order. They never blasphemed. They never left the temple. This is unshakable faith, continuing to serve even without seeing fruit. This silent pain shaped them for something greater that even they could not imagine. Being parents of Mary, mother of the Messiah, the prejudice was cruel. People whispered in the streets. Some said that Joachim must have sinned in secret, and others that Anna was not worthy of being a mother. It's difficult, right? Being judged for what you don't have. But this is the point where many give up, and that's when they chose to persevere. They didn't know it, but God was writing something that no human eye could predict. Sometimes the plan of salvation begins right where it seems like all is lost. Their story shows that even those who seem forgotten by society are precious to God. Perhaps you are experiencing something similar, struggling with a long wait, feeling rejected or outside of the divine plan. But Joachim and Anna's journey teaches that pain can be the fertile field where God plants miracles. What for men was failure, for God was preparation. The time of infertility was not punishment. It was character building, humility, deep prayer. In this dark beginning, they learned that true faith does not need an audience. It grows in secret, in corners where no one applauds. Joachim and Anna lived a genuine spirituality marked by silent sacrifice. And this is exactly what made them worthy to participate in the plan of redemption. This part of the story may seem small, but it is essential, because before the miracle, there always comes pain. And it is in this place that God begins to reveal His light. It's not easy to keep believing when everything around screams otherwise. Joachim and Anna experienced this firsthand. Even though they were known for their justice and piety, their lack of children made them targets of constant rejection. Joachim was even prevented from offering sacrifices in the Temple of Jerusalem, publicly humiliated for having no descendants. Imagine the weight of this for a man of faith. But he didn't rebel. He didn't question it. He just moved away to seek God even more intimately. Anna, in turn, felt the needles of contempt in her soul. The women of the people murmured, looked sideways, some mocked, and yet she did not close herself off from the Lord. Instead of isolating herself in resentment, she moved even closer to prayer. It is at this point that unshakable faith reveals itself, when human rejection cannot prevent spiritual obedience. Anna teaches us that even in the midst of criticism and judgment, it is possible to keep your heart sensitive and submissive to the divine will. Often the greatest victory is not achieving what you want, but remaining firm when everything fails. Joachim and Anna's faith did not depend on visible blessings. They believed because they knew God's character, not because they received rewards. This kind of faith moves mountains even when no one is watching, and that is precisely why God chose them for something so great. When the world called them failures, heaven prepared them to generate one of the greatest pillars of the plan of salvation, Mary. The truth is that rejection never has the final say in the lives of those who walk with God. Joachim and Anna trusted even when they were embarrassed in front of the community. They knew they were under a greater promise, even if they didn't understand the details. This trust kept them aligned with heaven, even though they were marginalized on earth. And so, like an underground river flowing unseen, their faithfulness continued to flow, preparing the ground for the miracle to flourish. Have you ever stopped to think about how many times we give up at the first sign of rejection? The story of Joachim and Anna invites us to continue, even when no one validates us. They were unsure of the future, but they were certain of who God was. And that was enough. Faith is not a button that we only turn on when everything is going well. It is a commitment to the invisible, to the promise, to hope. And if you are experiencing something similar, remember, today's silence may be echoing tomorrow's miracle. After being rejected by the temple and the community, Joachim and Anna took different paths, but with the same purpose, seeking intimacy with God. Joachim withdrew to the desert. He did not flee in despair, but in spiritual decision. There, in the silence between the stones and the sky, he stopped looking for answers and started looking for presence. Sometimes God takes us away from the noise of people so that we can finally hear his voice. And that's what happened to Joachim. Solitude became an altar. Anna, in turn, stayed in the city, but her heart also delved into the sacred. She began to go to the temple frequently, not to collect, but to pour herself out. His prayer was not noisy, but intense, silent, but full of faith. Anna shows us that intimacy with God does not depend on place, but on surrender. While the world saw her as an unhappy woman, God saw her as a consecrated woman. It is this divine vision that transforms pain into spiritual gestation. The Bible is full of moments when the desert becomes a school of faith, and Joachim lived it. Instead of withdrawing into self-pity, he gave himself over to fasting, meditation, and crying. That solitude was not empty. It was fertile ground for an encounter with the divine. Sometimes God removes all the voices around so that you realize that only His matters. And in this process, He reveals promises that can only be heard in the silence of the soul. Anna, during her vigils in the temple, cried softly, but every tear was a seed. She did not ask for riches nor revenge against other women. She just asked for a son to consecrate to God. Look how deep she wanted what she never had and to deliver. This is mature faith, one that understands that the most precious gifts are those that we return to the Creator. And while most people sought blessings for themselves, Anna wanted to be an instrument in the plan of salvation. What an example! This period of separation was not loss, it was preparation. The distance between the two did not split the marriage, but strengthened the purpose. In modern times, perhaps they would say that Joachim and Anna were in crisis. But no, they were being polished. They learned to transform emptiness into an altar, absence into adoration, pain into a deep connection with God. And so, the loneliness that could have destroyed became the portal where the sky opened. The next step? An angel knocks on the door. And then, when everything seemed stable but still silent, the unexpected happened. An angel appeared to Anna. The same rejected, tearful, discredited woman now received a message from heaven. It wasn't just news, it was a promise from God. Infertility would no longer be the end of the story. Anna would conceive a daughter, but not just any daughter, one consecrated from the womb, a girl chosen for something bigger than life itself. Can you imagine the impact of this moment? The angel didn't just come to bring joy, but mission. He revealed that this child would be dedicated entirely to God, and more, that it would play a fundamental role in the plan of salvation. That announcement changed everything. The weight of pain was replaced by reverence. Anna understood that her wait was not in vain. Everything had a greater purpose, and this revelation gave rise to an even deeper faith in her, not only for the grace to generate, but for the responsibility to deliver. Interestingly, Joachim also had a similar vision while in the desert. In different places, heaven spoke to both of them. This shows that when God is about to accomplish something great, He aligns hearts from a distance. The promise didn't come to just one person. It came to the couple. They had passed the test together, and together they would be honored. The reunion between them after this time apart was not just emotional, it was spiritual, sealed by the hope of what was to come. The Bible doesn't provide many details about how they reacted at the exact moment, but you can imagine the mixture of tears, joy, astonishment, and gratitude. The presence of the angel Gabriel, who would also announce the birth of Jesus years later, shows how connected this mission was to God's eternal plan. It wasn't just about a son, it was about redemption. And Mary, the daughter who would be born, already came into the world loaded with purpose and heavenly destiny. When we look at this scene, we realize something powerful. God usually visits precisely those who the world ignores. While the religious leaders judged Joachim and Anna, heaven visited them with honor. The angel brought more than good news. It brought confirmation that their faith had been seen, that their spiritual obedience did not go unnoticed. And this is how God works. He transforms tears into a legacy. But the most beautiful thing was yet to come. The miracle would become visible. When Anna became pregnant, the news spread like wildfire. What was considered sterile now carried life. The community, previously so critical, was left speechless. The miracle was undeniable, and more than that, it was visible. Hannah's pregnancy was received as a direct sign of divine favor. People began to realize that perhaps they had judged too soon, that the story God writes always surprises those quick to point fingers. The arrival of pregnancy not only transformed Anna physically, but renewed Joachim spiritually. He, who had been rejected in the temple, now walked the streets with a different countenance, not one of pride, but of reverence. The miracle touched them completely. Their home was filled with prayer, singing, and preparation. They knew that their daughter was not simply a gift, she was a mission. Mary would be created with principles, with consecration, with purpose. Can you imagine Joachim, every night, talking to Anna's belly, talking to little Mary about God's promises, about the temple in Jerusalem, about the hope of the prophets? This child would grow up surrounded by a deeply spiritual home. There was no luxury, there was no fame, but there was an atmosphere full of faith, a true domestic sanctuary, and that in itself was a great teaching for any generation. The greatest legacy is the spirituality lived at home. When Maria was born, there was commotion. It wasn't just the birth of a daughter, it was the materialization of a promise. Her every cry sounded like an answer to ancient prayers. Anna's every gesture was filled with gratitude, and even among the joy, there was a kind of surrender. The parents knew that that girl belonged to God. From the beginning, Mary was surrounded by an atmosphere of consecration, and this would shape not only his childhood, but his entire future. The miracle of pregnancy was the highlight of a long wait, but not the end of the story. On the contrary, it was just the beginning. Maria would grow up to fulfill a role that would change the history of humanity. But it all started there, in the womb of a woman previously called sterile, and in the arms of a previously rejected man. When we look at this scene with spiritual eyes, we understand that nothing is impossible for God. He gives birth to life where there was once despair. And the next step? Deliver Mary to the temple. At the age of 3, Mary was taken to the Jerusalem temple by Joachim and Anna. It was not a common custom to hand over such a young daughter to religious service, but this couple knew that that child had a special calling. They weren't simply returning a gift, they were fulfilling a promise made before conception. What many would see as sacrifice, they saw as privilege. Consecrating Mary was part of the plan of salvation, and this filled their hearts with peace, even as they said goodbye. The moment of delivery was solemn and emotional. Joachim, with teary eyes, held Anna's hand tightly while the priests welcomed little Maria. She entered the temple with short steps, but with an immense destiny. Anna watched her with a divided heart, joy for spiritual obedience, pain for separation. But their faith spoke louder. They knew that God's plan was greater than any personal comfort, and this simple act would become one of the greatest symbols of consecration in biblical history. Mary's life in the temple was marked by discipline, prayer, and service. Even though she was a child, she learned about the sacred precepts with unusual dedication. Anna and Joachim visited her whenever they could, offering affection and advice. But they also learned from her serenity, her devotion, her precocious spiritual maturity. All of this was the fruit of a home that prioritized faith and a heart shaped by the Spirit. That consecrated girl grew like a silent flame that would soon ignite the history of redemption. The decision to consecrate Mary teaches us that true faith often requires giving up what we love most. Joachim and Anna could have held Maria with the argument of paternal love, but they understood that true love is trusting God more than your own emotions. Delivering is not losing, it is participating in the divine plan. They knew that they were forming not only a daughter, but a servant of the Most High. And this type of surrender, even painful, generates eternal fruits. Mary's consecration was not just a beautiful rite, it was a prophetic milestone. There, in the same temple where Joachim had been humiliated, his daughter was now received as consecrated to the Lord. What a turnaround! What began as infertility, pain, and rejection has now blossomed into purpose, service, and hope. God honors those who remain faithful, and through that act of surrender, heaven took another step towards the redemption of humanity. But the story of Joachim and Anna still had a lot to teach. With Mary consecrated in the temple, many would think that Joachim and Anna would return to a common and peaceful life, but it was just the opposite. The home that was once filled with the presence of the daughter was now filled even more with the presence of God. They intensified their dedication to prayer, fasting, and most importantly, community service. The unshakable faith that sustained them through their pain now overflowed as a source of comfort for others. They became a reference of humility and living spirituality. Anna started visiting other women in situations of pain, especially those facing infertility. She understood like no one else the weight of this silence. I used their experiences to console, encourage, and pray with them. He did not speak with theories, but with tears already dried by the divine touch. Joachim, in turn, began teaching young people about the importance of prayer and voluntary sacrifice. They did not isolate themselves in the miracle. They dedicated themselves to the service with even more zeal. This post-consecration period was a kind of second calling for them. Now more spiritually mature, they knew that the legacy was not just in creating Mary, but in forming a generation willing to trust in God even without guarantees. They used every opportunity to teach that the temple in Jerusalem was not the only place of worship. The humble, willing, and broken heart was also the abode of the Most High. This revolutionized the way people viewed service to God. It's beautiful to think that even without formal religious positions, Joachim and Anna became true spiritual leaders. They were sought out by couples, young people, elderly people. Everyone wanted to hear their stories, their prayers, their advice. They didn't impose authority, they inspired. His house became a refuge, a school of faith, an extension of the temple, and all of this was built on the basis of spiritual obedience, humility, and absolute trust in God's plans. Joachim and Anna teach us that the true miracle does not end with the blessing received, it begins there. They turned God's response into a platform for transformation for others. This is a legacy of faith. They did not live to be remembered, but to leave an eternal mark on the lives of whoever crossed their paths. And without knowing it, they silently planted the values that would shape Mary herself, the future mother of the Savior. But the impact of this story would go beyond the community. Joachim and Anna's influence was not restricted to their home or the temple. It spread throughout the community like a sweet perfume that no one could ignore. The couple, who were once targets of scorn, were now an example of practical faith. Their names began to be mentioned with respect, not for status or power, but for the testimony of lives marked by spiritual obedience, prayer, and service. The people perceived something different in them, a peace that did not come from the world, but from an intimate walk with God. Neighbors and even religious leaders came for advice. They wanted to understand how someone who had gone through so much suffering could live with such hope, and the answer was always the same: God is faithful. Just like that. Their secret was not in complex formulas, but in an unshakable faith nurtured day after day. This made them even more accessible, because anyone could follow in their footsteps. Their legacy was like an open path in the middle of the woods, clear, firm, and possible to follow. Maria, even though she lived in the temple, carried with her the teachings of her parents. With every gesture of compassion, with every word of wisdom, she reflected what she had learned from Joachim and Anna. They were not just biological parents, but spiritual trainers, and this had eternal consequences, because everything that was planted in them blossomed in her. The plan of salvation advanced because a couple chose to trust even in the darkness. And that changes everything, literally. Over the years, their story has been passed down from generation to generation, like one of those ancient jewels that carry much more than aesthetic value. They carry meaning. Joachim and Anna became a symbol of hope for infertile couples, for the rejected, for the forgotten. They proved that no one is beyond God's reach, that even the sterile womb can generate promise, and that prayer made in the dark can turn on the light of an entire era. The most beautiful thing of all is that they did not seek greatness. They didn't want fame or recognition. They just wanted to be faithful. And so God exalted them, not with riches but with eternal relevance. Their name echoes to this day as a fundamental part of the biblical story, even without grand speeches or performative miracles. Their greatest achievement was saying yes when everything said no. And from that yes came the woman who would change humanity, Mary. But before her they came. The story of Joachim and Anna is, to say the least, inspiring. They show us that the greatest miracles are often born from the greatest silences. That unshakable faith, even in the midst of pain, can be the foundation for something much greater than we imagine. Now tell me, how many times have you thought about giving up because something didn't happen in your time? Could it be that, like Joachim and Anna, you are also not being prepared to generate something that will be part of an eternal plan? What does this story awaken in you? Perhaps it is time to resume the forgotten prayer, to rebuild that particular altar that time and fatigue have torn down. Perhaps your legacy of faith lies precisely in the small, everyday decisions, in that choice to forgive, to serve, not to give up. Don't underestimate the power of a simple but completely surrendered life. Joachim and Anna did not have the spotlight. They did not found kingdoms. They were not popular prophets, but they gave what was most precious to God, and this gesture touched the sky. And you? Are you willing to give your yes, even without understanding all the details? Are you ready to be part of a bigger story? If this story touched you in any way, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and share with someone who needs to rekindle hope. Here, each biblical story is not just told, it is revealed, and you are part of it.